Welcome to the Lovecars On The Grid podcast, your global motorsport roundup with me, Tiff, Needell and Paul Woodman.
Welcome to Lovecars On The Grid, your global motorsport podcast roundup. We got a bit of news in the motorsport world. We got an exciting Lovecars On The Grid at British Superbikes at Thruxton this weekend, live from Thruxton. Well, not live, but a day later. British touring cars up in Knockhill in Scotland and in the USA at Indianapolis. It's both NASCAR and Indycar, but on the road track, not the famous Spole that we know of. But in the news, let's start off with, I think, probably the hottest news in motorsport this weekend.
Yeah.
Weird thing from Alex Palou in terms of dumping McLaren.
Yeah, I mean,
you know,
because we've been saying, haven't we, every podcast, but he wins yet another IndyCar race. He's got to be a Grand Prix driver. He's got to, because he looks so good at IndyCar. But of course, a year ago, he announced he'd signed with McLaren, and it was very much with the thought of definitely being in McLaren's IndyCar team next year, and maybe even, getting a Grand Prix seat, because at that stage, the Piastri thing hadn't gone through. And of course, that really upset Chip Ganassi, who said, "You're contracted with me this year." There was courtrooms, and him and Zach Brown were throwing insults at each other. And eventually, Ganassi won and got Palou back to finish this year off, but gave Palou permission to do Formula One tests with McLaren. So it was all going to be McLaren next year. That was the contract. Ganassi only had hold on him for this year. And then all of a sudden, just out of the blue, Alex Palou says, "I'm not doing it, and I'm sacking my Monaco increased management as well." So Zach Brown's gone mental. I mean, he had 3 test days. They've had 4 test days. He did FP1 at the American Grand Prix last year in the McLaren. He's done 3 of these old Formula One car tests that they do at the Red Bull Ring, Barcelona, and the Hungaroring. So, McLaren, it's bizarre, really.
What's the point in testing if you're not going to be given the drive?
In a way, it's a sort of a kickback at McLaren, because it's almost what they did to Alpine, because Alpine paid for Piastri to do those Formula One tests for a year, and then McLaren stole Piastri off Alpine. And now Ganassi would appear that he's stolen Palou back by offering him a sort of multi-year. Well, they reckon it's a multi-year, the highest paid IndyCar driver in IndyCar. I mean, it might partly be because Palou see Piastri turn up. Said, "Oh, well, that seat's gone." Maybe if Ricciardo had gone there or someone else, he might think, well, so Piastri's obviously in McLaren. So now you'd have to wait for Lando to leave McLaren or something. He's looked at the McLaren IndyCars, which they just haven't performed this year. They're very much the third string IndyCar team. They're really not getting the results because they've got 3, really hot drivers, Rossi and thing. So he's thinking, well, I don't really want to be in a McLaren IndyCar next year, which was where he was heading. So he's just probably thought, well, I want to be in a winning car wherever it is in the world. But I mean, I don't know how you can just dump all these contracts. And his management company as well, would be that's just
there's something
amazing.
going on. To dump the contracts, to reject the contracts, I can get. But when you dump your management agency at the same time, there's just something a bit weird going on. Maybe he's got the maybe Perez is going. Spanish link there. There's a South American link and Spanish link, but I don't know. Maybe the conspiracy theorists. Well, who knows? Let us know in the comments below if you know the story.
But it's a shame if he does.
Going on.
If he does tie himself to IndyCar for 5 years, but there's no announcement from Ganassi that he's signed for 5 more. So I don't know. Yeah,
it always seems to be. I know there are a few exceptions, Tiff, but it always seems to be F1 drivers after their career going to IndyCar. But I'd love to see somebody at their prime coming to F1. Has that happened many times before?
No. Well, Mario Andretti, I suppose, came over from an IndyCar driver, and who else has come over? Well, Villeneuve came. He'd done IndyCar. Arrived in Formula One and got pole position in his first Grand Prix down in Australia, didn't he? He'd been IndyCarring. So yes, we've got Montoya. Montoya was in Formula One before IndyCar.
Juan Pablo.
So there's a bit of crossover showing that in fact the talent level is pretty much similar both sides of the Atlantic. Formula One boys would like to poo-poo IndyCars.
Of course, the talent's the same. Of course it is. We'd love to.
But, Grosjean, it's interesting. Grosjean's gone over there, and he was a top 5 Formula One driver, not maybe the ultimate, but, he's been top 5 IndyCar driver, but not the ultimate IndyCar driver.
Top 5 Formula One driver, Roman Grosjean?
I think so, as talent and speed. Those years he had with Lotus when he was challenging for the podium, it was there. The talent was there. He's just a bit wild at times.
Top 5, no, I'm not with you there. What else in the news?
No, not top overall. Top 5 whilst he was in Formula One.
Okay.
So when he was on a Formula One grid with a decent car, he was probably top 5, top 6 driver. Not in the history of Formula One.
Well, I get that.
But also talking of Formula One and contracts, Valtteri Bottas. I've said on this podcast before, it's the time he moved on. He's now looking like a Prussian cavalryman, I think. But I look at his moustache and his hair, he reminds me of someone from way back in Russian revolutionary times. His style he's wearing, but he's got a very high opinion of himself, and he's now said that I think he's got one more year in his Alpha contract, but he thinks it's worth sticking around at Alpha because of course it's the Sauber team that's going to be sold to Audi. So I haven't started talking to Audi yet. He's almost implying that Audi are going to want to rush to sign him when I think they need to rush to drop him, because he's almost getting outdriven by Zhao now at some races. And I think half the problem with Alpha is they haven't got a star driver that's really getting the most out of their car. Maybe they should look at Palau. I don't know if it's Palau.
He's staying for the money. I mean, there's probably no other. We want these amazing conspiracy theories, and he's probably just thinking, well, they're going to.
Yeah, but he's writing, but he's writing like he assumes they're going to want it.
Oh no, sorry, I was talking about Palau. I was going back to Palau. But Bottas has got to go. Bottas.
Yeah, no. He thinks it's worth sticking around. It's worth sticking around at Sauber because I'll be on an Audi. I don't think you will, Valtteri. I hate to disappoint you, but some drivers need to make space for some youngsters.
He's had his time. Any other news from you? I've got a little bit.
No, that's all the Formula One news around. It was made. The Palau thing's amazing. Yeah. Zach Brown spitting feathers. Maybe look forward to Saga next week when people send writs out. Who knows?
The jury's out with me and Zach Brown at first, but actually the interviews I've seen and the people that I spoke to say he's genuinely a really, really nice guy.
Yeah. I met him at time, spent time with him. He's a guy that came up from coming over from America and sleeping on someone else's floor to race in Formula Ford, and then go to build his empire. So yeah.
Amazing. Good for him. So not really news, but just a couple of shout outs. Some people we met because we go to BSB next at Thruxton. What a lovely lad that cameraman was, Richard Harris. So we watched. We were a bit cheeky because of Tiff. We watched on the.
You better be listening, Richard. You better be listening. Now we're giving your name check
as well. But he does all the Formula One that you see all over the world. He's normally turn 1. He's got a brilliant job. Yeah.
He's the crane man. He's on the top of the massive great crane. So Zandvoort, he'd be the man at the top of the crane up at
corner 1. And then we met lots of people over the weekend. Our competition winner, Sarah, who had an amazing time thanks to British Superbikes, and she was with her mum and dad as well. They had some laps for Tiff, which was great. We really got looked after. Those couple of lads who sat down with had a pint. One was an ear, nose and throat doctor. The other one worked at PwC. But just all over, we met so many nice crowd. Really, really nice crowd. And please, if you don't go to any racing events, whatever they are, British Superbikes is it's a major event. But whatever they are, go and just have a hot dog and a beer or a Coke or a coffee and just watch some live racing because
it was a great atmosphere, wasn't
brilliant.
And it was non-stop action. Stuart Higgs, the boss of British Superbikes. He hosted us, he invited us, and took us around everywhere onto the grids and places.
I felt guilty. He was looking after us so much.
I know. And Stuart Higgs, he's a bit like the Alan Gow of BTCC. They're both sort of guys that run it their way. They know what they know what the public want. And they make both BTCC and British Superbikes. A weekend that the public want to go watch, and they run it really well. They're both sort of a bit of Bernie Ecclestone in them, that they make things happen. They don't get pushed around by manufacturers or anyone else. They make it work. And, it was we were on the grid. Lovecars on the grid. We're on the grid presenting pole man for race number 2, a very young 20-year-old Charlie Nesbitt with his Omologato. It's hard to say Omologato watch. Yeah. So, we were on the grid presenting that. That was quite a buzz. And it was a weekend where the form book was turned on its head. So Thruxton, is such a good racing circuit, and that's what it proved. Every race we saw, didn't we, on the top of our control tower was just racing going on. But it was a race where some rookies got on the podiums, and Charlie Nesbitt, one of those. But at the same time, it was a race dominated by an old 35-year-old gritty Aussie, Jason O'Halloran on his McCams Yamaha. And the fact he won all three races, you think, well, that was a dull weekend. It's like watching, Verstappen all weekend. But no, I mean, he did lead on the Saturday. We weren't there. And he did lead from the front row and won that race very comfortably. But in the other two races, because in that race one, because it's all about tyres. Again, it is about tyres, but they're all on the same tyres. Nobody's got any different choices. So you're all stuck on the same Pirelli, and round those fast corners, the tyres wear out and the handling goes away, and then you're on a knife edge if you're not already on a knife edge. But O'Halloran, he won the race, and his fastest lap was like sixth quickest. So he just won it with guile and brain.
Well, you said during the race, look at these young lads, and they're all fighting it out, and they're jostling for position, and he just was there, wasn't he? He was always there, and then a lap or two to go, he just
sixth fastest. That put him. It was sixth on the grid for the second race, but pole man was Charlie, who finished second in that first race, but got fastest lap. So again, O'Halloran started sixth or seventh, I don't know where it was, but he just hung back, and we watched this bunch of six out front, and there were about 5 laps to go. Well, what's that blue McCams Yamaha doing as he closed? And it was like 5 laps to go, and he took one place on each lap and then one on the last lap. But it was just magic, and he just kept his tyres better, and around the fast sweeps of the back, you could tell he all of a sudden, with 5 or 6 laps to go, had a big advantage and was able to just tuck underneath them as the other boy, the kids slid wide coming out of Goodwood Corner.
Say kids, they're very accomplished,
110 miles
riders now, aren't they? But they're young, and my goodness, they got some cojones. My goodness! So you drift out of a corner and you want to maximise the track width as much as possible. In a car, if you put 2 wheels on the grass, it's not the end of the world typically, unless it's very wet. You get very unlucky, but these guys, they're millimeters away from the grass. It's just boggles my mind.
Well, the thing that got us, because they took us onto the pit wall, didn't they, for the morning warm-up of the Superbikes. So the start-finish straight to any car driver out there is not a straight. It's a gentle curve. And these bike boys come out the chicane, and the curve has got a white line in the grass. And some of them, well, they're leaning at about 10 degrees.
More than 10 degrees. More than 10 degrees.
Well, maybe not the start. And they get in their wheels on that white line. And if they go 3 inches to the left, they've got their 2 little skinny wheels on grass. It just wowed us both. When my son Harry was there, we were just looking over the pit wall, and it's just a wow factor.
It really was. I was shocked. I've watched lots of motor racing, Formula One down right the way down, but that was probably one of the most exciting things. These bikes on the limit. When a car's on the limit and you see a car on the limit, lots of Caterham racing, it's impressive. But these bikes, they've got no room for error whatsoever. Otherwise, they're off and. Hopefully not, but they can get seriously injured when you're on bike. And I saw, I don't know whether you saw, Tiff, but one of my massive admiration, big fan of James Cracknell. He was there on the weekend as well. So
was he? Okay.
Rower.
Looking around.
And adventurer, but
adventurer.
Well. Yeah.
But the interesting about the weekend though, that made it more exciting was that the dominating beer monster Ducatis were nowhere.
They were nowhere.
And again, it's funny how different tracks, and so Thruxton is such a special track. And it didn't suit their Ducatis. I think they were mainly running about 13th and 14th. They had a best result of 9th, I think, in one of the races. So they were out of the pitch, which helped everybody else come forward. And this kid, Nesbitt, who's on a Honda, he had a second and then 2 third places, 3 podiums.
So that's officially the best performing Honda in the world currently.
Well, we don't know. We were just saying, this is competition, bike boys right below. When was the last time a Honda in either MotoGP or World Superbikes has been on a podium? Because Hondas have been having such a bad time, certainly MotoGP. And
I'd certainly like to see Honda come back and be not dominant, but just be in the mix again.
The other boys, the Kawasaki's right in front. Another kid we have to mention was Max Cook, 20 years old. He led a lot of the third race we were watching, and he unfortunately had 2 fourths. They had a crash right in front of us on a Kawasaki when they tried to bundle 3 wide through the chicane on one of the laps, and he was the one pushed to the right over the curbs and lost them, got punted off his Kawasaki. Yeah, 20-year-olds. A big mention, big up for Max and for Charlie Nesbitt, and all the bikes for entertaining us. But two youngsters having a field day around Thruxton.
And it was just
youngsters. We watched that
exactly.
race with 13-year-olds. Was it 13 to 17-year-old race?
13 to 17 or 18, yeah.
17.
And they're just fierce. One poor lad came off going into the hairpin, and he felt a bit sorry for himself.
The chicane, yeah. But yeah, so thank you, Stuart Higgs and British Superbikes, for a wonderfully entertaining day out. Which, if you haven't been, go.
Yes, and they're not just Superbikes. I mean, yeah, they're off to Alton Park next. Or am I making that up? But
it was so many races, so many categories, and they got like 38 bikes in some of the races.
It's non-stop. It's non-stop action the whole way through. You got the stunt team as well.
And Tiff Needell did some break. Actually, if you can get to look back at Thruxton, on catch up. There's some big black marks through the complex and going into the chicane. Well, they were my big black marks, because our competition winner also had 2 laps with me, and did her father. So during the lunch break, in front of a crowd, I was able to go power sliding around in my BMW with the passenger rides. So I left.
You actually did your 8,000th lap on, didn't you, last week?
That last week.
That.
We had a competition. I've done not 8,000 laps, 8,000th passenger 8, in 10 years.
Wow.
So that's 3 laps each. So that's 3 times. That's 24,000 laps I've done with someone.
Be careful what you tell the taxman. This is 8,000 passengers.
I've paid it all.
I know you have.
I've taken 4-year-olds to 84-year-olds, stick them in a passenger seat. And I did some nice donuts in the end as well, which got a round of applause. Thank you, a round of applause from the Thruxton grandstands.
So your 8,000 laps, which is a big thing, big feat. 8,000 rides, sorry. Does that include people like me that you've taken out?
No, all the extras. There are plenty of extras. Done plenty of little freebies and warm-ups and friends and families. So I'd still love doing it.
Go down and do it. Thruxton's a great place to go and just soak up the atmosphere anyway. Get a Jackaroos, get yourself a bacon bat, and do some laps with Tiff if you're into that type of thing, because it's very good. Let's go to BTCC in Scotland.
Yep.
I thought it was quite good. It was the weather played.
It was wild. Yeah, as soon as I got home from the bikes, I was straight on the recordings, watching the touring cars all evening. And it was just a very similar. We jumped from a wonderful, entertaining series of races on 2 wheels to a wonderfully entertaining series of races on 4 wheels. It was once again, it was the Ash Sutton show, because last year we had those amazing battles with Jake Hill, which were just tense and nose to tail. But in the first race, he had an amazing battle with Josh Cook. That was a spectacular. When Josh Cook took the lead, going through that horrible leapy chicane. They just call it chicane, don't they? But it's vaulting a mountain.
Yes.
And I think Ash got it slightly wrong. He was brushing the tyre wall on the way in quite often with his front left. He's sitting on the right low, and he's able to judge so perfectly. He's just grazing. And he got it a bit wrong, went out a bit wide. Cook took a more straight line over the huge curbs. And Ash, when Cook was alongside Sutton by now had his rear left wheel on a front-wheel drive car in the gravel slightly over the curb. He came back on and they touched, and Cook got the lead. But then sadly, it all started raining, and then it became a bit hazardous. And Ash went round the outside of Cook, didn't go into Duffer's Dip, and Cook slid wide, and they sadly clashed side to side pretty much, and Cook speared off into the barriers, which is a huge shame. But then as the rain continued, we had this just demonstration by Ash Sutton. The more sensible people like Ingram, who was running about 4th or 5th, they peeled in for wets. But it's like if you're leading, you don't want to be the one that goes to wets, because will it stay? Will it dry? But it started raining more. And for about 3 laps, we had Ash Sutton, just most ridiculous demonstration of car control in a front-wheel drive car that looked like he was power sliding around with a rear-wheel drive. But then there was a pace car lap, and by then the rain came heavier, so Ash gave up his lead and pity for tyres. So that puts Ingram, who'd been sensible, first into and also who else was in there? I've got his name written down here somewhere. No, Tom Chilton. Tom, he won a touring car race by being clever with tyres. Tom's a wise old boy, and he was first in for wets. So I ended up with a first and third, I think, because Jake Hill was second. Of Tom Ingram. But then they have the dreaded ride height check, don't they, the top 3. And of course, when they're on slicks, which don't wear down much in millimeters, and also at the end of a hot race, they go and pick up all the rubber, which lifts the nose up to the ride height. And of course, wet, you can't pick up any rubber on the cooling down laps, is all wet. And wet tread wears down. And of course, Ingram and Tom have both been out for longest on wets with front wheel drive, worn down the bloody wet tyres, so then they failed the ride height check. Whereas Jake Hill, of course, rear wheel drive, the front wheels don't wear out.
Yep.
So it was Jake Hill inherited the win of the second race, and Ingram went to the back. So two sort of potential winners were at the back of race 2, because that was Josh Cook, of course, who was in the wall, and but they all battled back. The second race turned out to be yet a replay of the Sutton versus Jake Hill, with Jake in the lead and Sutton trying to go around the outside every corner, and not succeeding. Jake held on for a really good win in the second race. So he won 2, Jake, in effect, after the demotion. But then the reverse grid race, that Sutton again came through from 6th to win that one. But Josh Cook came up to 8th place from 24th in race 2. He was obviously the quickest car, pretty much. And then he got from 8th to 2nd in the reverse grid race. I mean, just entertainment. Legends had about 4 races. They had wet weather, storms, there were Porsches, Minis. Entertainment.
Knockhill
you might have got a bit wet in Scotland. You might have got a bit wet watching in Scotland. It wasn't quite like us sitting in Thruxton on the bench in the sunshine.
It was lovely. What's Otis doing barking away back there?
Yeah, dog's barking. I know someone's upset him.
So in terms of BTCC, the standings, Ash Sutton, 310 points. Tom Ingram, he is really barking, isn't he? Tom Ingram, 273 points. Jake Hill, 260. Colin Turkington really was incredibly disappointed with this weekend. He was in the wall. Yeah, he's out of the championship. So
it was a shame. It was really a shame because if Tom Ingram had won that, held on to that win, then the points would have been much more interesting. So
I hope Ash Sutton, he is such a brilliant talent. I hope he goes on to do something. BTCC is brilliant. It's amazing entertainment. It's
where's Jake in the points? It's Jake's here. We've had an Ingram champion. We've had a Sutton champion. We all want Jake Hill to be a champion.
He's 50 points behind. Exactly 50 points behind.
Yeah, it was 25 for a win or something, isn't it? So
yeah. He only needs a good weekend, and Ash Sutton have a bad weekend, I guess. But I would like to see Ash Sutton next year do some, I don't know, world sports cars or something.
GTs, yeah, GT brilliant.
GTs, yeah, very good. Jade
so
Edwards, your mate Jade Edwards didn't have the best of weekends.
No, had a bit of a clash in the wall. Happens. It was the Ash Sutton show.
Especially around Knockhill, especially when it's wet. Right, where are we going next? Let's go across.
Well, the only other races, we saw great British stuff. We had our 2 national championships, really entertaining. And then worldwide, there was only really the NASCAR and Indycar at Indianapolis on the road course, as you said. And it was funny, they were both what I would call old-fashioned races. So neither had big yellows or full course yellows. And they ended up with just a head-to-head between 2 cars, tracking down, exciting, tense, but no real razzmatazz. It's like what I'd call an old-fashioned race. Plenty of interest, but not too much wham bang, thank you, man. And the IndyCar, we have my IndyCar page. I lost my IndyCar page. The dog's still upset. Here, come in. No, still upset. The IndyCar, because again, this road course is a funny course, and it's a real setup course. And again, we talk about Formula One, mustn't make it too spec car, because then the engineers, we want the highest intelligence. And yet the Penske team that have been really dominant were rubbish in qualifying. And the Rahal team that were rubbish at Indianapolis didn't even qualify. Graham Rahal was on pole position. So it's a real good story. They lived there. That's where their team's
Didn't
based.
3 McLarens get through to the final 5 in the qualifying?
Yeah, the McLarens came. So the McLarens, but they all falter in the races. There were 3 McLarens in the top 6 shootout, maybe only 2, because it was 2 Rahals, 2 McLarens, and 2 Andrettis, I think, in the hot 6. But so Rahal on pole, Christian Lundgaard, his young sidekick, was 2nd on the grid, and Jack Harvey, who was having a rubbish season, was 8th, which for him was good. And Graham Rahal just drove the perfect race. But it's a strategy place, Indy, and it's how you use your red tyres and your black tyres. The black win the long distance one, the red's the shorts. There was only one full course yet after the first lap. There was a shunt in the first lap. Scott Dixon, who only qualified 16th. I mean, Palou was 12th on the grid. The Penskes were 11th, 20th and 22nd. So Newgarden, who's
Wow.
chasing the championship, was 22nd. Anyway, there was a clash just on the first lap, and Scott Dixon spun off, trying to avoid it. So he went to the pits and started his strategy for the race. His mum's home, that's why he's crying. Started the strategy for the race by pitting and putting on the alternative tyres and getting rid of the blacks. And because he qualified so bad, he had 2 brand new sticker tyres. So he began this race from the back, where he would last a bit longer on fuel. He's a great fuel saver. He'd make his tyres last a bit longer, and he slowly was tracking the pack. While Graham Rahal was, leading the pack and leading all the way and looking comfortable. Then all of a sudden, when the final pit stops happened and Graham Rahal went in and came out again, there's Scott Dixon 6 seconds ahead of him, having just run this brilliant, clever, strategic pace all the way through without ever being noticed almost, until all of a sudden, wow, Scott Dixon's leading. And he'd been last. And this is what you can do in IndyCar with strategy and experience.
You've said all along you want to know where the race is, and you said all along about penalties, and isn't that a bit confusing for the punter that like? Well,
it happens in Formula One as well. When you get those 3-stop races,
not from last to first, unless you max.
No, I'm not being able to do that. No, you can't do that. No, but that's what I like about IndyCar. You can do that. It confuses the hell out of the crowd sometimes. How did he get there?
Yeah.
But because everyone's on different strategies, and you've got refueling as well, so you've got that going on. You don't really know who is where until they've had that last fuel stop and it's on the final run to the finish. That's why in the middle of the race, it's it's all a bit confusing. So to the outsider, it's not like they're all going round. They're all going round. But there was still plenty of little battles going on to entertain.
So
Scott's now
entertainment meter.
Well, it's only about 6. It's an enthusiast race. That's what I mean. It wasn't a wham bang multi overtaking. But that track, it always seems to lend to that sort of race in the end.
Where were all the people?
Plenty of spectacular, flash opposite lock, a few side-by-sides, wheel clashing.
Where were all the spectators, though, Tiff?
Well, they're all high. They're all down at turn 1. They're just, again, no big crowds. They line the banks, again, it's enthusiasts racing. So it's not Miami Beach, baby, Vegas, casinos, champagne, caviar, club centres. It's the true fans that go out to watch true racing.
Well, we were talking to somebody on the weekend, we won't say who, and regarding Formula E, and they were saying that they're not allowed to show the empty stadiums.
Yeah, cameraman, yeah.
Well, you just gave it away who it was.
Anyway, Scott Dixon has now won. This is now his 18th year. Hadn't won yet this year, so he's now made a win every year for 18 years. He's won 54 races. He's just a canny. If only he'd come. It was a bit shame for Formula One, really, because he left New Zealand where he was going to be a star, and he just happened to have an air ticket to America instead of England. It was like, someone's given me an air ticket. So he went to America first and never made it to England to try and be a Formula 3 driver or a Formula 4 driver. He just ended up in America.
I bet he's living his best life over there. I mean,
yeah.
Amazing.
So poor old Graham came second from pole. He hasn't won for 6 years. Christian Lundgaard went from 2nd to 4th, and Jack Harvey went from 8th to 14th. So it was a bit of a disappointment for the Rahal team at the end of the race. But I mean, it was great for Graham to be leading for so long.
Callum Ilott?
So, yeah. No, mid-pack summer. I didn't get all the full results. Brought Armstrong, the Kiwi, is doing well. He was one that got spun around by Palou, in fact. Because Palou was 3rd in the end. Palou still came through, got some points.
Okay. What about NASCAR? Was that any more exciting?
We must settle on Palou or Palau. Someone tell me down below, will you? I don't know how you
I think it's Palau. I think it's Palau. That's how he pronounced it.
I don't speak Spanish. Oh, the NASCAR was a similar. So NASCAR, again, there was no yellows. And because they have these 3 races now to make it more exciting in NASCAR, they have these stages. And at the end of each stage, a third of the race, 2/3 of the race, they come the yellows out. You have full course, you all bunch up and all pit. But because that made such a mess of the last Indy road course race, they didn't stop them afterwards. They still had the stage of victories, but the race just kept going like a normal race. And because there were no big crashes, I think they never had a yellow, never had a full course yellow, which for a NASCAR, which normally Since those full course of safety cars in Formula One now, we rely on to create the excitement.
You're right.
They're all bunched up again.
Well, I used to despise the safety cars, but
I know.
Now you actually kind of want
so
one.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So even the NASCAR was a real race because they just raced and had to do your own strategy. There's some interesting qualifiers because we had some. Or obviously the road courses, you quite often get these outsiders coming in. But Shane van Gisbergen, that was so spectacular, winning in Chicago, he came back for another race. Actually, the truck race, he's looking at a full-time NASCAR drive next year. And he went to the half-mile Indianapolis track up the road on a Friday night. Did a trick. He got lapped at the end, but his interviews, he's just such a charming character because he's just buzzing. He's just a kid in a sweet shop because he's now going to where he dreamed of going as a kid to America to race in NASCAR. And he did a truck race, around a short track over and just loved it. He was so upset that he got lapped. He went a lap down with about 10 laps to go, which upset him. But he qualified 8th. Another Aussie came over, Brody Kostecki, another of his supercar mates. He was qualified 11th. Some bloke you may remember called Kamui Kobayashi.
Wow.
Qualified 28th in a Toyota, obviously the Toyota man, Toyota engines in half the cars. So Kamui was out there, qualified 28th. And Jenson Button was only another go, but qualified a pretty disappointing 31st out of the 39.
I did see how the lead was won at one stage. Is it Suarez, Daniel Suarez?
Yeah.
Came into the pits.
Yeah.
So the speed limiter is 60 miles an hour, whatever it is, the pit limit, sorry. And the car in front of him, maybe 100 yards in front, started slowing down so much more. So normally anyone that's done any racing, watched any racing, they'll go to the last second and even lock up and just get that pit limiter. And this guy Daniel Suarez, managed to catch him up, almost go in the back of him. He braked so late, pulled up about 100 yards, and then got his just desserts. He's got his reward because he pulled out in front of him by the skin of
jumped him.
To jump him. What a brilliant!
And his pit let him down in the end. That helped him. In the end, it was all tears in the Suarez pit. I mean, it was a great race. Literally, because this is coming up to the cut-off for the playoffs, where the top 16 go through. Yeah. There's only 3 more races. This one that was Indy. Then they go to Watkins Glen next week, and then there's a Daytona, which will just be a luck of the draw who survives Daytona as always. And 3 drivers were leading the race. 3 of them haven't got a win. A win gets you straight through, and the rest of the top 16 will be on points. So Malcolm McDowell led from Chase Elliott and Daniel Suarez, and these 3 dominated the race. They were neck all the time, right on it, all 3 of them, and they all need to win to get through because the points are a bit iffy. And McDowell led all the way and just held off Chase Elliott, who was just pressurising. Again, it was like the IndyCar race. The pressure was there, the tension was there. And it should have been 3 going into the last lap. So Suarez came in for his final pit stop, and the poor Jackman got his air gun hose trapped under the front left tyre of the car. So the Jackman let the jack down because they did the right-hand side first. Well, left-hand side, actually, was Indianapolis. And so Jackman runs round to the other side, and the poor gunman tries to follow him, and he's toes. So that cost Suarez his chance of the race. But it was a really good motor race. But plenty of going on. There were still cars mid-pack banging into each other and a bit of fisty moves here and there. So there was still plenty of entertainment. But yeah, really good motor racing in America.
But it sounds like the most exciting racing this weekend was definitely on home soil. Scotland, Knockhill and Thruxton, England, which I think was definitely the highlight of the world global motorsport was UK-based. This weekend.
Lovecars on the grid. We're on the grid at Thruxton. But anyway, thank you, Stuart Higgs. It was wonderful. We had a great day out.
It certainly was. Thanks, and thanks for listening. For those of you who listen, we don't get many listeners anymore. Oh, it's depressing. But
we do the preview for next weekend.
Oh, yes.
MotoGP, Austria, Red Bull Ring. That'll be entertaining for sure around there. But track limits, unfortunately, come in big time.
Will Susie be back? Because Susie wasn't.
Well, hopefully, Susie's still not. We have best wish to Susie. If someone can tell her, if she's not, I don't think she's listening, but someone tells Susie we still love her and we're thinking of her.
She's our only guest ever we've ever had on here. People have suggested a lot that we should get guests on here. So that is.
That's you. You don't organise your fault. You don't even give me a different microphone yet, let alone anything else.
We need some money.
I don't know what these things are.
We need a sponsor.
The big thing with Moto 3 is that, this build-up for the qualifying laps, which is Red Bull Rings, because it's a short track and these 30 bikes all packing up. They're awful. Everyone's queuing. And then someone tries to get through the sort of fast lap. So there's bound to be grid penalties for queuing, going too slow.
Should not allow it. FIA sorted out.
Oh no, they've got us. It's so dangerous. But there will be great racing. But track limits there will be a nightmare because they little tiny wheels touch the green. But that will be entertaining. NASCAR at Watkins Glen, I think, will be entertaining. They're pretty spectacular around there, big curb hopping stuff. So they're around there. And all the Aussie supercars down under. And then the Japanese Super Formula. Only 3 races to go as Liam Lawson tries to claim the crown, which would be a great achievement over Japan. He's 1 point off the lead at the moment. And of course, trying to say, hello, me, hello, Red Bull, hello, maybe not AlphaTauri, hello, Boss. Boss is the story. That's another story in the news, isn't it? Boss might be taken over the AlphaTauri team, which is a bit weird as AlphaTauri is a clothing company selling to a clothing company. Who knows?
Gone are the days it used to be manufacturers.
See you next week.
Thanks for joining. Cheers.
Tell other people, if you have listened or watched this, for goodness sake, tell other people. Otherwise, it's a bit depressing for us, to be honest. Really.
It is a bit. But we're still going to keep going for now anyway. At least we're going to keep going to the end of the season. And if we can't get more people, what do we do? We'll make
it's my whole Monday.
I know.
Cheers.
See you.